Hi, welcome to YTV and this week's segment of Everybody Has a Story. Today we're very excited to be joined by Rabbi Jim Ponet, who is the Howard M. Holtzmann Jewish Chaplain at Yale. In 2010, Rabbi Ponet was launched into the national spotlight as the co-officiator of the wedding between Chelsea Clinton and Marc Mezvinsky. After more than 3 decades of being a religious leader at Yale, Rabbi Ponet will retire from that position at the end of this academic year. Rabbi Ponet, thanks for joining us.
Cody, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So, 32 years. You've been here since 1981. Did you foresee that you would be here this long when you first arrived at Yale?
Great question. I came with a full expectation to be here 3 years. I did think that within those 3 years I would help Yale gain a Center for Jewish Life. There was no facility. I was in a basement office, the basement of Bingham Hall. There was a house. It's now SAE, but that had been known as the Rabbi's House from 1965.
The purposes have changed.
Yes, indeed. And there was a basement in 305 Crown Street, which was known as the Kosher Kitchen. And this was the topography of Jewish life at Yale. So for at least 3 years, in fact, for 10 years, after 10 years, it began to occur to me that maybe we were not going to go back to Israel. We'd come here directly from Jerusalem, where we had lived for 8 years. But for a good 10 years, I kept thinking, soon we'll go back. In fact, we had an apartment in Jerusalem and so forth. So it's, to me, a good example of, the way we've lived our life. Is that plans are useful, but don't fully believe them.
Well, let's start at the beginning, before you had the plan. So you, I understand, entered college not nearly as religious as you are now. You had somewhat of an indifference towards Judaism. What made you change? What experience enchanted you with Judaism?
I think the truth is that I had a deep interest in religion and in spirituality, but then I didn't and hadn't found it in my own experience of Judaism growing up. I had been bar mitzvahed in a Reformed temple, but I hadn't found that experience to be as deep as that for which I yearned. So I came to Yale as a French major, and after 2 years studying French, I decided all that I really cared about was God, which is still pretty much the case for me to this day. Had there not been a war in Vietnam, which we Yale students were protected from by dint of being granted a 2S deferment, so we guiltily went about our studies. So I stayed on campus. I think I would have taken time off to visit the community that was around disciples of Swami Vivekananda then in the West Coast. But there was no way that would have protected me from the draft. And so out of self-protection I remained, but I changed my major to religious studies. The academic study of religion did not satisfy my yearning. And I decided that rabbinical school might be an interesting option. It wasn't lost on me that would also get me out of the war, because the United States somehow thinks that men and women of the cloth ought not be forced to serve in an army. I don't know why. Not so in Israel. So I presented myself to my rabbinical school, Cincinnati, Ohio, Hebrew Union College, your hometown, Cody. I did that by saying, I don't wish to be a rabbi, but I'm ignorant of our tradition. I wish to learn. Will you accept me on those terms? And they did. Well, after I was there for several years, I fell in love with the school, with the opportunity to learn at that level, to be surrounded by people that shared similar obsessions to myself. After my first year, I went to Israel. My first year in Israel was the first time in my life that I was totally happy with the privilege of being a Jew. Up until then, I was not so certain that it was so good to be a Jew. But when I saw the depth of the linguistic depth, the landscape depth, the human depth of the mystery of what it is to be a Jew as manifested in the complexity of Israeli society, I said to myself, this is as good a way of being a human being as anybody can find, and it's mine by birth. And so I embraced it. Went back to Cincinnati, completed my studies, and came right back to Israel. Did not want to serve as an American rabbi.
Now you changed your name though before. Was it before going to Yale? You changed your name from Podnetsky to Ponet.
That's correct.
What was the reason for that change?
Well, it's a good question. When I was 16 years of age, when I changed my name, I had to go to court with my father, Sam Podnetsky, And I went with his full blessing and the blessings of his father, Charles Podnetsky. They both said, "Oh, Jimmy, the name is, nobody can pronounce it. It's, cumbersome. Go ahead, reduce it." I looked at the possibility of turning it into Pound, although Ezra Pound I knew was a famous anti-Semite. But there were other ways to reduce it that would completely Anglo-Saxonize it. I came to the conclusion that I would keep a portion of it, but it wasn't lost on me, as one who loved French, that Ponet could indeed be construed as Ponet. And I will tell you quite the simple truth is this. I said to myself, if you have this face, and you have the name Podnetsky in 1960, America, you are signaling to anybody and everybody when they look at you that you are a Jew. And I wanted to have a leg up on that self-presentation. A year after I got into rabbinical school, within the first year I was already thinking about changing my name back. I called my father, the late Sam Podnetsky. I said, "Dad, I'm going to take our name back." And he said to me, "That's crazy." I still wanted to do it, although I was disappointed that he wasn't proud of my decision. And I went to one of my Rebbes, still alive, Reb Zalman Schachter, and I told him of this idea. And he said, if you were to change your name again, I think you should Hebraize it. Why go back to an Eastern European multisyllabic? How about Podet? How about Peniel? I thought these were good ideas. But I also had failed to achieve in Cincinnati legal standing. I had to wait a few more months. By the time the summer was over and I had absorbed my father and Reb Zalman, I said to myself, no, I think I will keep it and let it be the source of a tale that I'll be able to share with others, the source of a person who discovered, as this says in the book of Psalms, Even Masu Abonim Haita Rosh Pina, which means the stone that the builders were willing to cast away has become the cornerstone of my life. So this name symbolizes to me that which I thought was worthless and discovering it as the most precious aspect of this time, being a human being.
Well, you came back to Yale after being a student. You came back to Yale in 1981, and you've really seen Yale build its Jewish life. You've been a part of building its Jewish life over the past 30 years. How do you think the increased influence of Jewish life on Yale's campus has changed Yale's identity as a school?
That's an interesting question. I'm going to refer back a little further in time to give you an historical distance or context on that. When I was attempting to inspire alumni to dedicate monies that they would give to Yale for the construction of a Center for Jewish Life, I used to convene on alumni weekends, reunion weekends, groups of alumni. I would take the current leader of Yale Hillel, say 1991, pivotal year, you'll hear why in a moment, and I would have her name was Rachel Rubenstein, be part of a panel that was known as Jewish Life Then and Now. In 1991, I think the oldest living alum I had on a panel was Irving Harris from the class of 1936. And I also had from the class of 1951, marking his 40th reunion, Alan Slivka. Alan, each of them got a chance to speak about how it was to be a Jew at Yale then, until finally Rachel spoke about what it was like in 1991. Still no Slivka Center, but a very active Jewish community. Alan got up and he said, "This is the bravest thing I have ever done at Yale, because when I came to Yale in 1947, it was understood that all of us who were Jews left our Jewishness at home. There were exactly 1,000 men in a Yale class, and 100 of them exactly were Jews. There was a strong 10% quota. Well, by the time I got here in 1964 as a freshman, that quota had been not fully lifted, but it was rising, and certainly there were more than 10%, perhaps more like 14, 15% of our class were Jews. But still, being a Jew at Yale was not at all central to what it was to be a Yalie. So today, in 2013, if you come to Yale and you decide that you want to, as your extracurricular commitment, to become the co-president of Yale Hillel, or the leader of Yale Friends of Israel, or the editor of Shibboleth magazine, or the Yale Israel Journal, for example, you're not at all hesitant about placing that on your resume. I mean, these elements of leadership exercised inside of the Jewish community are fully consistent with what it is to be a Yale student. In 1968, when I graduated, that was not so at all. When I went, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to jump in because you talked about what it means to be a Yale. And one thing that I think a lot of students talk about is this idea of exploration and learning, even things that you may not subscribe to or agree with. You've been, very keen on taking an interest in other faiths and lessons from other faiths. And I was just wondering, what benefit do you think on a religious journey that people take, maybe as students or later in life, what benefit do they get from looking at other faiths and taking lessons from them?
Oh, it's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I think we are really privileged to live in an era of openness, of where there is happening right now in many quarters, including on our campus, a conversation among the world religions. Now, interfaith dialogue 50 years ago was about, I'll tell you what it is to be a Jew, you tell me what it is to be a Christian. I will refrain from asserting or trumpeting those elements of my religion that seem to suggest that I got it right and everybody else has it wrong. We're way beyond that now. We are now at a place where I can go to a Christian, and I've done this. Not that my Christian counterparts are always able to reciprocate, but they do exist, and to say, you know something about the intimate spiritual relationship that a person can have with a figure like Jesus, who serves both as a mediator of God for you, or perhaps you see God in the human form. I want to know more about how you relate to Jesus. Is there such a thing as spiritual friendship? When you think about Jesus, do you adduce an image? Do you hear a voice? I can go to a Buddhist and I can say, I know that you don't believe in God, and yet I see that you think compassion is really important. What is the ground of compassion as you understand it? Is forgiveness an obligation or an opportunity? How do you understand forgiveness? What about peacefulness? So I feel that they can come to me and say, well, what does it mean to live with a religious discipline? Why do Jews care about the world? If Buddhists have a theory of the bodhisattva who returns to the world, even though he's got an option to get off the wheel of life and death. Why does a Jew stay in the world? Why are Jews so worldly? I think Christians and Buddhists have what to learn from us, and we have much to learn from them. So I take it from every quarter. It was no religion has it all right. Maybe the reason there is a plethora of religions is maybe even analogous to why there are a plethora of languages. Not simply to create confusion and competitions for who has it right, but rather to get a richness, depth, a deeper texturing of what it is to communicate, what it is to be human.
Well, that leads right into my next question, which is, in 2010, obviously you had the honor of presiding or co-officiating over the interfaith marriage between Chelsea Clinton and Marc Mezvinsky. Chelsea Clinton is Methodist and Marc Mezvinsky is Jewish. You evolved on that issue, if I'm not mistaken. Many years ago, that's not a marriage that you might have seen as appropriate. Can you take me through that evolution? And does this idea of learning from other faiths, did that contribute to your evolution on the issue of interfaith marriage?
Thank you. Good question. It did contribute. And my evolution went this way. What I discovered was, for many years I said and believed that I could not and ought not perform the wedding of a Jew to a non-Jew because I would be contributing to the demise of our people. I believed the demographers. And I felt it was my responsibility to see to it that our people would continue. As my spiritual life deepened and my appreciation for other religions deepened, as I began to recognize how Jewish Christianity is and how Jewish Buddhism is, how from a Jewish point of view I've got stuff that they're working on, that did start to have an effect on me. But perhaps most important, I used to say to such couples, I wouldn't say I can't do your wedding because I think if I do I'm contributing to the demise of the Jewish people. I found that to be a bit harsh. I probably did it once or twice and saw that I was moving in an area that was really not congenial. I didn't want to do that. I would say instead something else that I believed, but that I came to realize was not the full truth. I would say Jewish law, and I'd be right on this, it's still right to this day, Jewish law does not recognize a marriage as being valid except as contracted between two Jews, two unmarried Jews, or a divorced woman or man who has given or received a get, a divorce document. I'm a rabbi. I get to perform weddings because Jewish law recognizes, you don't need a rabbi to perform a wedding, by the way, and I would help them to find alternative ways of getting married without a rabbi. But I hid behind the law without taking into full consideration the fact that I was more than willing to pray in a minyan, prayer quorum in which men and women were treated equally, which Jewish law does not recognize. I was willing to have a Jewish woman blow the shofar in Rosh Hashanah, which Jewish law doesn't recognize. That when I found it okay to violate the norms of Jewish law, I did. But all of a sudden here, believing it, but really what I saw was I was taken in by the demographic terror of the end of our people. I no longer am. I think that the existence of the Jewish people is a mystery. I don't think it is my responsibility or the responsibility of the Prime Minister of the State of Israel or even the Israeli army, in which I had the privilege of serving. I don't believe that any person or institution or any structure has within it the way to guarantee that there will be Jews in the world. That I want Jews to continue being in the world is a given. That I know the way to keep them in the world is not a given. But I do know ways to enhance the quality of being a Jew today.
Well, let's go into not just Judaism, but religion in general among younger generations. Is we don't see it as prevalent, especially on college campuses like Yale. So for college campuses that are more secular, what do you think the importance of a religious presence is, even for students who don't belong to anything?
I think that I think I have a new answer, and I appreciate this question as well. I think it goes something like this. The role of being a Jew, as I see it now, and this is not something that's only for rabbis, it's to be a Jew, is to bring healing and well-being to the world. Nothing less and nothing more than that. At a personal level, at a communal level, at a global level. That's what it is to be a Jew. The trappings of that, going to synagogue, celebrating the holidays, either they contribute to that, in which case I maintain them because they enable me to live in a world that is so broken. So now, the relevance of what I'm saying to a college campus is as follows. The 4,000, now it's 5,200 students that are undergraduates at Yale College, my primary focus, are probably the most stressed and challenged group of young people that I'll ever have the privilege of being part of and knowing. I mean, there are counterparts at a handful of universities in this country. Your intelligence, your expectations, your promise, your talent weighs on you. You have much to give. And this university wants you to give it, and it's going to create structures of recognition and challenge to get you to give all. And you will crash, you will fail. Nobody succeeds all the time. The university doesn't know how to prepare you for the hard falls that are intrinsic to what is called human life. And the role of religion and spirituality is actually minimally therapeutic. It takes the broken souls that are here and reminds them you are not your resume. You are not your career. In fact, you're not even your body.
Well, that leads me into an interesting topic. You talk about challenges students face. There was a wonderful piece by Tim Creeder in the New York Times that I think came out in about 2009, but it started to make its way around social media again just this past couple weeks. It's called The Referendum. And it talks about a challenge that people in midlife face. And Tim Creeder says that one of the hardest challenges in life is looking at the lives we didn't lead, looking at the path not taken, the potential yet unfulfilled, I think is the quote. How can religion and how can faith make us feel comfortable with the life we've led and the choices we've made?
Beautiful question. I would say the following. One of the great arts that is nothing important that we're talking about is unique to religion. So the distinction between secular and religious is in many ways no longer useful, because when you go to a psychotherapist, is this a religious experience or is this a secular experience? When you sit quietly on the grass on cross campus or old campus and listen to the Caroline concert at 5 o'clock on a sunny day, and you feel a sense of ease and well-being and the sound of the bells vibrating through you, is this a secular experience? Is this a spiritual? I find the naming and distinction not useful. So now that having been said, we don't know how to accept forgiveness. We do not know how to forgive ourselves, allow ourselves to be forgiven. We don't know how to accept our own innocence. We are convinced of our guilt, of our deficiency, and we draw energy from the guilt and deficiencies that we feel to move ahead with our lives with a curious belief that actually the Lutherans gave great expression to already, hundreds of years ago, and still to this day, I think, although they're chastened, i.e., we seek to justify our lives. I think the notion that you need to justify your life or that you can justify your life is wrong. So my sense of what I learned from the roots of Jewish trust, emunah, trust, Jewish sense of well-being, is that nothing that you do or don't do, no failure, is unforgivable. I feel this way about the word sin, which religious traditions have enshrined, implying some violation that hurts God, something ultimate, something evil. How do you live with your own evil, with your own deficiencies, with your own ugly desires, your own demonic desires? How to live with them? This is a psycho-spiritual question. Religions, in some measure, have taught us how to, and in many ways they have failed. No religion gets it right. But these are the questions and the struggles that religions come out of, and our partial and inadequate but partial responses to. So those are the issues you're talking about. When you have the talent and the energy, the promise, and our university says to us, you'll see it at graduation in a year, or you've already seen it if you've been to a Yale graduation, the 10 people that win these top prizes, you represent the great hopes of your generation. It is you who will help your generation conquer the forces that threaten our globe with environmental disintegration, etc. So I will heal cancer. I will solve the problem of poverty. I will solve the problem of water, etc., etc. Great dilemmas. And what if you don't? Or what if you despair? How do you stay in it? How do you stay in a project that you can't complete in a lifetime? This is where emunah, where trust, where an ability to recover a sense of well-being beyond defined achievements in your life. You're not your achievements. You're not your deficiencies. You're not what you do. Knowing that can allow you to do your best.
And what are you?
At this point in my life, I would say I am love. I am light. I am blessing. I have other voices in my consciousness that say, no, you're not. You're a liar, a lazy lout. You have not given enough. You have not done enough. You haven't used, and those voices, I understand now, are part of a phenomenon that exists, I believe, in each of us. Some traditions will call it the ego. The rabbinic tradition calls it the yetzer hara, mistranslated as evil inclination. I would say, some kind of instinctive, self-condemning and orientation that then projects outward, the belief in the reality of evil. It's the central struggle in the Hebrew Bible as I read it today. And it's got everything to do with the book of Job that I am totally obsessed with.
Well, I think to most people at Yale, you've done quite a lot here, and now you've chosen to retire, and as you say, not stepping down, but step up to other things. Last question, what's next for you, and what do you think you'll miss most about this place?
Oh, thank you. I'm hoping that I will have an office on campus outside of the Slivka Center, that in that office for the coming year and a half, 2 years, I will do a lot of writing, a lot of thinking. And I'm hoping that on the heels of that, and in conjunction with that, I will continue to teach, to write, and to work in a very intimate spiritual way with individuals. I imagine, well, not only young people, but I've had the privilege of working with young people as friends and colleagues for a very long time. I don't know whether that will disappear or not. But the deeper truth here that I want to be able to say is I don't really know. All I know is my best work is in front of me, not behind me, and that I'm looking forward to finding out what it'll be. And on most days, that feels quite wonderful. I feel very privileged to be in this position. But I'm a human being. There are days where I say, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And what am I doing? And therefore, who am I? And as I often say to students, I say to myself as well, just because you do not know where you are does not mean you are lost. That's a deep religious observation, and it's a source of guidance. I'll be using it over the coming years.
Rabbi Ponet, thanks for joining us.
Cody, it was a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us as always. For YTV, I'm Cody Pomeranz, and this has been another segment of Everybody Has a Story. Back to you in the studio.